It's the last day of May 2025, May 31st, and I'm continuing on with the story of my 2003. My name is Phil, and you're listening to The Lib. Yes, the story continues on of my 2003. Boy, this thing has taken a life of its own, but I knew that it was going to. I don't know why I'm even a little bit surprised, truthfully. I probably would have to admit that after I did the first episode of 2002, which really kind of surprised me because I thought that it might have taken more than it was going to take, and it did take two episodes, which kind of surprised me, but not really. You know, when you have an idea that something's going to go longer than you expect, and then it does, and you're sort of surprised, but not really. That's where I felt about that. I did expect 2003, however, where we're at currently, to be taking a little bit longer than I thought 2002 was going to take. And certainly by this point, I've done now, specifically from 2003, something like 7 or 8 episodes just on 2003, it seems like. So 2003 definitely a lot deeper than I thought it was going to be. But I knew it was going to be deep, but truthfully, I didn't know it was going to be this deep. I was really honestly expecting it to be maybe 3 episodes, four tops, but I knew there was a lot of meat on the bone, and my goodness, there was even more than I could have imagined. Perfect example. Here it is, another episode featuring my 2003. Now, in all honesty, I can only imagine that I might have, after this one, maybe one more. Just depends on how this one goes. But I know we're getting close to the end of my 2003. And in all honesty, I was very pleased to get to that end. It seemed like that year was a never ending story, kind of like this episode and the last several seem to be compiling into. But it's the life that I lived, the experiences that I had, and like I've said on multiple occasions, the story that I needed to tell. So I'm going to go ahead and do just that. I will admit that I am a little bit agitated as I'm about to do this episode. Not necessarily for the content that I'm going to bring out today, but like I said, I'm recording this thing and it's May 31st, 2025. And to be a long story short, today was not the best day for a multitude of reasons. But one reason specifically, I have plans on talking about in a future episode. So just remember that when you look back, well, not look back, when an episode comes up that features a story, just remember that I told you way back in, well, when this episode comes out, which is going to be June 21st, 2025, that there was definitely a reason why I was not the most pleasant going into this episode as I recorded. But that is that. We'll talk about that, like I said, on a later date. But as for now, we're going to move along. How are we going to move along? We're going to start with, of course, as always, fill in the blanks. What is the question for the fill in the blanks? it regards to, well, the item that I'm using for my background today. It's a cup. Yes, it's the official lip cup. The question would be, do I have any more of these and do I have any to give away? The blank is real simple. No. This cup, much like all the other art that I make, this cup is a one of one. Only one exists. You're looking at it. Now, is there a possibility that there could be more? Maybe. It all depends on whether or not I get the LLC and get this media company going that I want to get going. Until then, the cup you see before you is the only cup. So once again, the question, are there any more cups like the one you see in front of you, the lip cup? The answer is no. It's just that one that's right there. On that note, I'm going to ring the bell and I'm going to start the main event. But before we go into the recap, I'm actually going to drink some of this Blackberry Dr. Pepper. Love this stuff. Only have cans right now, but hey, I'm okay with it as long as the Blackberry Dr. Pepper is in there. Ah, Blackberry Dr. Pepper. Gotta love it. Now for the slight recap. But first, for all of those who may be listening to the lip for the very first time, I strongly recommend that you stop this episode right here and go back and listen to episode, I believe it's 204 or 205. I don't have the note directly in front of me, I'm sorry. But if you go to the Lip YouTube page, you will see an episode that says My 2002. Start there and listen down. Because if you don't, this episode, which is me talking about my September in 2003, isn't going to make the most amount of sense unless you hear where it started. Even with the recap, it's not going to help you if you hadn't listened to the last uh, 8 or 9 episodes because they're all combined and they really make one big episode. So you really need to start at the beginning. And like I said, that beginning would be episode, like I said, I don't remember the number, but the name of the episode is My 2002. Start there and work your way all the way back down to this. And it'll all make sense. Trust me, it will. But for those of you who have been listening on a regular basis to this gigantic story that I've been telling, here comes the recap so I can sort of jog your memory a little bit. In the last episode, I talked about my trip to the University of Penn in August of 2003, where I met Dr. Thomas, who was a young lady doctor who really knew her stuff. And I stress young because she was, like I said, at the time I was 25, and I honestly don't believe that she was much older than 32, and that's a guess. But she was extremely sharp, tremendously bright, and we talked a lot about a lot of different things. And I think part of that was to sort of break the ice so that not only did she know about the condition, but she knew about the patient. Unlike Dr. Kaiser, who I had, and I've said it 1,000 times, the man was simply ready to write a book about how he cured me of sarcoidosis, which, of course, is the disease that I'm seeing Dr. Thomas for. For all those who have listened to this show in the last 8, 10 weeks, you know that as much as I wanted to tell this story, I didn't necessarily want to give everybody the names of the people who I actually interacted with. Thus, I've been using um, names that I just picked out of the blue, but the names are not the names of the people who I actually interacted with. So, of course, Dr. Thomas, the great doctor that she is, her actual name wasn't Dr. Thomas. But for the purposes of the story, it is. Now, to get on to September. But there's one more part of August I need to talk about. And that's the simple fact that I had a very long appointment, like really long. It was like 3 hours long, where I had some tests run, and then I was actually in her office for a good hour, maybe a little longer. And like I said, we talked about the things that I did outside of being sick, how I was feeling, the things that I wanted to do. We talked about all that. And like I said, in the process, she made me feel very comfortable actually being treated and seen by her. She was the first female doctor that I've ever actually had. And no offense to my primary care physician currently, but realistically, she's probably the best doctor I've ever seen. She really is. Now, granted, I would have liked, it would have been really neat if she could have repaired my ankle or my bicep, but that's not her area of expertise. Pulmonary specialist is what she was and is, and my goodness, I can only imagine that if she did have a different discipline, she would be still the best doctor I ever had at that point. The coolest part about the interactions that I had with her was she looked at the medication that I was on, a steroid. Prednisone is what it's called. I was on that. And I had been on prednisone since I was in the hospital in May. So by the time August came around, I'd been on the stuff for nearly 3 months. And it turns out that she was all in on the fact that I was on the prednisone. And she wanted to continue with me being on the prednisone. Ultimately, the goal, she told me, was that it was suppressing the symptoms of the sarcoidosis. I was having less bad days, and I described my bad days as being where I was very winded, out of energy, physically weak. By that point in time, the other stuff that I had, the cough, the swelling of the ankles, those were gone. But the weakness and the fatigue, which was the thing that really hit me over the head, the fatigue was the worst. And everybody's heard the old saying, I wouldn't wish that upon my worst enemy. Truthfully, if the person was my worst enemy, I absolutely would wish the fatigue on them. It was miserable. It really was. And the combination of me doing all those hundreds of crunches and taking a lunch walk was extraordinarily beneficial to sort of rebuild my stamina. And it helped me in a lot of ways because I was able to really understand if my day was a bad day or a good day based on the fact that a good day I'd be able to do 300 crunches, breakfast, before lunch, before dinner, and before I went to bed. On a bad day, I might be able to do anything around, if I could get 100 out, all day long, I knew it was going to be a bad day. If I started off and I was like, in the morning before breakfast, I could only do about 30. I knew the fatigue was setting in. And I knew that it was going to be one of those kind of days, and I had to just prepare myself for it. My walk wouldn't be as long, or I wouldn't even take the walk. I'd wait for another day. So ultimately, all that exercise that I was doing during that period essentially was to give myself to monitor myself so that I would know just how much energy I had for the day. And boy, when I had one of those days when I was doing 350, 400 crunches every single day, like every single meal, I was feeling pretty good that whole day. But then, like I said, it could be 2 days, 3 days later, I fizzled out, and I could only do maybe 25, 30 in the morning. Sometimes I wouldn't even be able to do them before lunch or before dinner, and I'd try to hit maybe another 20, 25 before I went to bed if it was a really bad day. Now, you see, Dr. Thomas was all in on that as well. She definitely gave me the approval to kind of use that as a metric to determine just how I was doing that day. And when she set up my next appointment, which was for September, she said that, well, we're going to probably see you every month for the foreseeable future. Every month. I was like, my goodness. So I'm going to be taking a trip to Philadelphia from Manchester, New Jersey, where I lived at the time, every month. In my mind, I was like, boy, what happens if it's a bad day when I'm driving? Cue the last episode. I had my mother with me as a co-pilot or even the driver, depending on how I was feeling, on my way to the University of Penn. And now it's locked in my head that I'm going to be doing this every single month for the foreseeable future. It was what it was. I just had to deal with it. And after I left that August appointment, I had made an appointment again for September, and it was towards the end of September. Yeah, it was the end of September, just after my mother's birthday. Like the 20th, 21st, something in that neighborhood. My mother's birthday is the 12th of September, and it was definitely towards the back half. I can remember that much. Now, throughout the month of September, I had the same usual chores that I would do in and out, back and forth. I would continue to eat my basic meals all the time. I would continue to do the crunches. I would continue to do the walking. And I would play video games and watch TV as I felt throughout the days. Um, One of the series that I ended up watching was a really cool one that ESPN put out. I still have the DVDs in hard copy. Yeah, I'll never let go of those. It was called Playmakers. It's a really fun series. Only had 12 or 13 episodes, and the NFL didn't like it because it kind of portrayed some of the situations in the locker room in a slightly negative light. And after that season was over, that was it. They didn't make any more. The NFL said, don't do that. And ESPN said, absolutely not. We will not be making any more of these. And sure enough, they didn't. I would certainly recommend that series if you can find it. It's called Playmakers. It's a little intense, I'll have to admit. You're not going to want your kids to watch it, but as long as you're an adult, it's a very interesting story. It really is. Other things that I did during that September was one of my favorite adventures. I decided that if I'm going to really push myself, because I need to find out just what I could do, I took the longest walk that I had taken, maybe even since before I got sick. Maybe not. I walked the boardwalk quite a few times, up and down in the same day. But this is a pretty good walk. It was during a time right before my mother's birthday, and I said I wanted to go to this one particular pizza place, and I didn't have a menu. So the best decision I could have made for my energy, anyway, I said, you know what? I'm gonna leave a little early for my walk for my normal walk for lunch, and I'm gonna hike down to the pizza place that I enjoyed very much during my vacation, where I went to those 49 different pizza places and ate 117 slices of pizza. I went to the very first pizza place that I did during that run. That would be good old Frankie's Pizza Place. Now, when I was driving, I know that a combination of the speed that I was driving and the distance, which wasn't that far in a car, took me 7 minutes to get to that spot because the Wawa that I worked at and Frankie's Pizza Place were in the same plaza. And it took me 7 minutes to get there. That's just how it did. But of course, 7 minutes driving is definitely going to take you a lot longer when you're walking. And even longer still if you have a energy robbing autoimmune disease. But of course, at 25, I figured, you know what? The worst thing that can happen is it take me all the day in order to get there, and then take me the rest of the day to get back. And so I decided to go ahead and do it because all the times that I had eaten at Frankie's Pizza Place, I had never had a menu because I would just walk over and I would just place my order and just pick it up and drop off some coffee as I was there. And of course, this particular day, as I'm walking down there, I wasn't bringing any coffee, but I just needed to know two things because I knew he delivered. And I knew that he delivered out to where I was living. But I didn't have a menu. And I knew what I was going to get, but I had no idea what she wanted. So I walked that distance. And like I said, because of the energy robbing sarcoidosis, it probably took me, how long was it? A long time. It was a very, very long time because I never stopped, but my pace slowed tremendously. It took me probably like 4 hours down and back. Now, had that been from what I'm dealing with right now, 5 years ago, when I was probably at my peak in shape from working at the Department of Corrections, 2020, maybe even 6 years ago, 2019, I probably could have done that walk in an hour based on what kind of a shape that I was in. But clearly, even at 25, because of the disease, I was really in no shape to make that walk. And I think about it now, hindsight being 2020, I probably shouldn't have done it But as I stated in a previous episode, when I started doing my crunches, I came up with this mantra that I would say to myself over and over and over again. And I did it when I was walking on the way back home because I was really, really tired and I had nothing left. Probably on the way down, I made it and I was exhausted. Probably a quarter of the way back, I was completely on zero. My gas tank was done. And I started saying it to myself every few steps. I will not stop. I will never stop. And considering I'm sitting here recording this show for you right now, I didn't stop. I actually made it all the way down, all the way back. And I think it was 2 days later was my mother's birthday. And ordered the food. They came on down, delivered it. Perfect. Worked out real nice. Now, is there any more in September I want to go over? Because realistically, that was the biggest thing that happened in September was that walk, going down there and getting that. I think there are a few other stories, but I want to save that for another format. Just remember, a time will come where another format will come out, and the stories that I'm telling now may be a little bit more elaborated upon. I will go into a little bit more detail because, for one, in another format, I'm not going to have sort of a mental time restriction that I want each of these episodes to be on. And it'll just be easier for me to really focus on individual parts of the story. And that's how I want it to kind of play out. So realistically, there is only one more part of September that made sense, that worked out, and that would have been um, my second doctor's appointment. Again, I get down there, and again, I have some more tests before I go see Dr. Thomas. And again, in her office, we talked for about an hour, and then she gave me another examination, and things were still moving in the right direction. She hadn't made any strange or over the top adjustments to my medication. She was pleased with how things were going, and I told her that my good and bad days were still about the same. And then she was like, "Well, we're going to do this again in October." And so October was about to begin, and it was a very interesting time because it turned out that during that time in October, my mother had pretty much began to transition from Mount Zion Baptist Church in Barnegat, where I can only describe us as a family to be not just a royal family in the church. It's a weird way to describe it, but maybe the royal family in the church. Let me explain, and then I can work through October. Many people have gone to church and they've seen people who were in the church who were very, very, I guess you could say, close to the pastor and how the church was running. Now, sometimes it would be family members of the pastor or families who have been in that church for a generation or two and they have really put a foothold in on the church and sort of, not to say they run the church, but they have a strong influence on how things go in the church. Now, as far as Mount Zion Baptist Church goes, my family would definitely be considered royalty, if you want to call it that. It's a weird way to put it, but dug in would be another way to put it. Because not only was it that there were generations of my family who were into this church, my grandparents, particularly my grandmother, and her siblings were the first children who went to the church because her father was one of the first deacons when the church was established. So my great grandfather was a deacon when the church was established. And quite literally, um, he helped build the physical building. And then his sons also helped part of the building. My grandmother and her sister started to do a lot of things in the church. In fact, both of my grandmother's, I don't know about both. I know for sure, um, her one brother, William Sylvester, ended up being a deacon for 39 years at that church, following in his father's footsteps. My grandmother and her sister, who were older siblings, ended up being pretty pretty prominent in the church as well. Um, my grandmother's sister Daisy ended up doing all kinds of things: trustee, missionary, president of the usher board. And my grandmother, her biggest thing was that she was the head of the kitchen committee for 30 years, long, long time. And both sisters ended up being mothers of the church. And needless to say, the beat went on. My mother, my aunt, and all of their cousins went to that church and played roles, from being in the choir to being trustees, a lot of levels. Then, even in my level, I ended up being the president of the usher board for a long time, from probably not probably, definitely from the age of 11 until the age of 19. So not only was I a part of church, of helping running the department of the church, I was very, very young when I did so. And then, of course, it kept moving on. I mean, my cousin's kids actually went to the church. My kids have been there. So quite literally, to show you just how deep my family went in that church, from the very beginning of the church being founded, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations of my family have entered that building. Needless to say, amongst members who have been in that church, we are the oldest family in that church. The most interesting part about it is that after my grandmother's passing, they actually named the fellowship hall after her. Now, having said that, you can only imagine that it was a very difficult decision for my mother to actually leave Mount Zion and go to another church. So obviously, the church that she chose had to be someplace very, very special. And without question, it really was, and still is, Community Baptist Church in Manchester, not too far away from where we lived at the time, literally within very simple walking distance. It was right there. And that church, Community Baptist Church, was in transition itself at the time. They were preparing to look for a new pastor when my mom found it and went started going. And during that time, a very, very good man who has since retired from his post at Community Baptist Church, we'll call him Pastor Shaw, or at the time, Reverend Shaw. And the members of the church were preparing to decide whether or not he should be the next pastor. And through the month of October, all the members did a month-long fast to decide and pray to figure out if Pastor Shaw was the man for the job. And not only was he the man for the job, he did the job for a very, very long time. He ended up being the pastor for Community Baptist Church from 2003 all the way up until 2023, I believe. He was there for 20 years. So it was a very good decision that was made to have Pastor Shaw lead the flock for that length of time. And that was an adventure because I had wanted to try to fast with everybody else, but because of this disease, there are certain things that I wasn't able to do. And that was one of them. So the only thing I could do was, instead of not eat, I didn't play Xbox for that month. So that was kind of my fast, was not playing Xbox. And anybody who knows me will certainly tell you that me without playing Xbox for a month is a big deal. The only times that I've ever had that happen is when my Xbox didn't work. So that should tell you how big a deal that it was for me not to play with a functioning Xbox. But they say it was my fast. And it was important and it made sense and it worked. And truthfully, that 20-year run with Pastor Shaw couldn't have been a better man to run the church at the time. Now there's another very good man who is in place now. I'll call him Pastor K. He's a good man. And I hope to see him soon. Just a matter of time for me to just get down there with my mother and we'll visit. I'd like to do that at least once a month. Give it a try. Just a matter of getting to it. I think that's October. I believe that's October. Yeah. I think I might be able to get through the rest of this if I just stay focused and stay on point. I think I can finish up 2003 today by going into November. Well, no, I went to October. I had another appointment with Dr. Thomas, and again, it was an hour-long appointment. It wasn't as long as the other ones. I didn't have to do any blood work or take any more X-rays. I simply went into her office and we had an appointment that lasted again around an hour. More information. She gave me a physical. She continued to ask about how my symptoms were going. And she felt that there's a possibility that I was getting better because I was telling her that my bad days were getting less. and my amount of crunches were getting more. I was able to do, instead of that 300 to 400 crunches, I was able to crank out some 500 days. This is when those 500 days began, which was in that October point. I was getting in really better shape when I was getting on those good days. You could definitely tell there's a difference. And she was pleased with the progress. And as a result, she said, "Well, we think that this thing is progressing in such a way that let's um let's see in November and see how things are going." And we're gonna get to November, like right now. I can bang right into that because I go back in November, and while having an appointment with her in November again, it was another good hour appointment, and she was like, "Well, you seem like you're doing even better than you were in October." And I told her that I was. I felt good. She was doing the lung sounds and checking out my lung capacity because that's one of the big tests that they took when I was in the hospital and all the way through all the visits that I went with her. I did lung tests, ready to blow into this thing and sort of see just how long you could do it and see how much air your lungs are holding. And they were getting better. And she said that things are progressing to a point that maybe I could actually make my return to work. And I was like, well, why not? I feel better. Might as well go back to work, right? I mean, what good is it to be a manager when you were in training and then you were out from literally May until November at that point with a small hiccup of 3 weeks in June? Let's actually get in there and do some work, huh? And so she set up a plan and she said, hey, this is what we want you to do. We're going to send you back in December, early December. Let you go back. I want you to go on in there. We're going to set it up so you can go right back in. But I'm going to set up an appointment just before Christmas so that we can see how you're progressing. And after that December appointment, we will evaluate you to a point to see if maybe we can have these appointments less. And I'm like, okay. So this is actually getting to the point where I'm making some serious strides. I'm really, really happy about this now because it seems like I'm getting better and better. And so I go home from the November appointment and I continue with my crunches. I continue with my walks, even though it's a little colder now. I'm still doing it and I'm feeling better. In all honesty, I think the cooler air actually made it a lot easier to breathe. The good, nice deep breaths, getting all that nice, cool, crisp autumn air into my lungs. It just sort of actually felt good. And I was really pleased about that. It was an interesting point in time. Although there was one slight negative that I failed to mention earlier. Turns out that I was really a winter person prior to this. And I've told many people story that, yeah, there was a point in time I liked the winter and I liked being cold. But for some reason, during this time of being sick in 2003, as much as I liked that cool air in my lungs, I did not like it on my skin. And I immediately began to hate being cold. I don't know if it was mentally because of being in the hospital for 8 days or if it was something else, but whatever it was, to this day, it's after midnight now, so it's actually June 1st, 2025. But boy, I can't deal with the cold weather anymore, and I blame sarcoidosis for that. At this point in time, I mean, I wear hoodies a lot, long sleeves. No, usually short sleeve shirts, but long pants. I don't wear shorts anymore. I don't think I've worn shorts in over 20 years because of the fact, even in summer, I'd rather be hot than have to deal with even a slight possibility of being cool. Just don't like it at all. Man, I totally forgot about that. It's a good thing I thought about it. Yeah, November is when I discovered that I just can't do the cold anymore. I just can't do it. And boy, I can't. If it's less than 40 degrees, mm-mm. I need to like set a little fire, put on a whole gigantic parka to the point where I can barely move. I need to be sweating. I can't deal with the cold at all. And that's primarily the time period when it started. Really was. Hmm. Speaking of things that I started earlier, knowing that I was going back to work in December, there was something that I had not done that in my mind I wanted to do. And I thought about it in middle August, but it really never dawned on me. Now, I had been sick for a while and I hadn't even added to my collection at this point in time for probably 3 months. But I still wanted to do something that I hadn't done, and it was something that was necessary to truly make my collection my collection. And so, a few days before I went back to work in December, I took the time to do my first official count of my cereal box collection in late November. I pulled them all out of the closet that I had them at one time. I had two fold system that I was working on. Number one, I had, oh, excuse me, it's a little past my bedtime. The first thing I did was I needed a physical number. The second thing I needed to do was separate them based on brand. And that was something that was going to allow me to really understand exactly how many I had and what I had. So the first thing I did is I got a couple of pieces of lined paper and I wrote down the names of the cereal boxes, what it was, and what brand it was. And the first one that I wrote down, which was the first one that I ever collected. Now, I mentioned that I was going to talk about this again from the cereal box collection episode, which I did right before my first episode of 2002. I mentioned that I was going to talk about this, and here it is. Yep, this is the payoff for what I was telling you. And what I did is the same thing that I do now, started back then. I took that Michael Jordan gray cereal box, wrote it down, put a number one. It was number one, first box I got. And it was under the cover of Wheaties. Now, granted, Wheaties and General Mills makes Wheaties, but I had a lot of Wheaties boxes, and I figured that maybe I should just isolate those, and so I did. Wheaties has its own set in the inventory. And then, of course, I had all kinds of other ones, Frosted Flakes and Lucky Charms and all other manner of types, and a few that didn't have a General Mills or Kellogg's designation. They were a different kind, and I only had a handful of them. So I created another whole line of my inventory called Other. Now, Other is a group that I use for cereal boxes today that are Walmart exclusive, or some of the ones like Magic Spoon. They go under Other because there's not enough of them to create an entire line and a whole category for itself. So I had Other, and it's still my smallest group. I believe Kellogg's is my biggest, but at that time, before I went back to work, I counted them all, I logged them all in, and then I took the envelope from my season pass. And of course, season passes are different now from Great Adventure. It's all digital. It's all digital. Back in 2003 and up until 2007, when I had my season pass, it was a physical card that came in the mail. And you had to go to the park and have it activated. Now, my Aunt Susan, who passed in December of 2024, gave me these season passes from the time I was 18 up until 2007 is the last one I took. The only thing I got for Christmas from her the whole time, because I went all the time. And so I took that season pass envelope and I wrote down my final number that I had counted. After I'd counted them all and I had put them all in the lists, and the very first number on that list was 248. I had 248 cereal boxes when I finally counted them in 2003. Now, mind you, I started my collection with that Jordan Gray in 1993. So it had already actually been 10 years of me collecting cereal boxes, and that's the first time I counted them. And I have that envelope to this day. It's laminated and it is in my office because I no longer use it because I filled it up. Every time I got a different box, I would put a new number in, and I would continue to calculate until I got all the way through. Now I have a special laminated board that I made that I record the actual number of my cereal boxes. Now, that number is 1006. I have 1006 cereal boxes that I have recorded. Granted, I have a handful that are not recorded, but those ones are doubles. And I got them as a part of trying to add to my collection. They were just sort of extra boxes that came with some of the ones that I had found that I ordered. Still good boxes, and I still keep them, but I haven't logged them in. But still, my inventory is a running inventory. Whenever I finish a um, a page, I laminate that page and I put it in the full inventory. And there is an active inventory that I use for each brand that I write on until I fill it up. That's how I do it now. All of that started back in 2003, November. You know what? I have enough time and I don't have enough material, so this is really going to be where we're going to end this, I believe, because I went back to work in December of 2003 and I had a lot more energy. I had a much better attitude because when you're not dying, it's a little easier to work. You're a little bit more pleasant when you realize that you're not having to push through near death in order to serve somebody coffee. Makes for a little bit better attitude. I have to admit, it really does. Um, and I felt pretty good when I came back. And Steve A, my manager, Steve T, my I would have to say mentor in management, and Joan, they were glad to see me because Anne had left and they had a lot of work that they were doing, and I was able to um, to alleviate some of that pressure. And ultimately, I continued on. I went back to the doctor in December, and Dr. Thomas asked me how work was, and had a nice another hour long interview, hour long doctor's appointment. And her assessment was that I was in good shape. Now she wanted to maintain and monitor how I was doing, and she didn't take me off the prednisone. What she did instead was she gave me a step down plan because she said you really don't want to just stop taking prednisone, especially since you've been taking it since May. And at this point, it's December. So we're talking 7 months of constantly pumping myself up with prednisone. So what she said is we have to sort of cycle you off. And over 4 months in 2004, that's what her plan was to do, was to cycle me off. I started off by taking the regular dose that I was taking. I'm going to take that for one more month. That was January. In February, the dose was going to be cut in half. So she told me to buy a pill splitter, and I literally took half a pill every day for a month, which was February. And then in March, take a quarter of a pill. And then by then, she wanted me to have another appointment after taking a quarter of a pill for a month, which I did. And that appointment was in March, and she said, finish the quarters of the pills for the rest of the month, and then I was off of it by April. So I was literally on prednisone for almost a year. And she wheedled me down until I was completely off of it in 2004. But ultimately, the sarcoidosis was remission is a cancer word. It was it was gone, and it had after taking those tests, the sarcoidosis was gone. Now, one thing that she said is it could come back. You never know. We're just going to keep an eye on it, and that's what I did for the next year. I had an appointment once a year. Like, well, I was no, no. After March, I had an appointment in the summer. I don't remember exactly what month it was. It was either June or July. And then I had one more appointment in November, towards the end of 2004. And then Dr. Harry told me that, hey, we're going to, oop, not Harry. That was the other guy that I switched to because Dr. Thomas left. Yeah, Dr. Thomas left after I saw her in 2004 in November. I almost forgot about that. I don't know how. And then before she left in November. No, she left in November. I saw her in November. And then I went and made an appointment because she said that I don't need to go there except for once a year just to get a checkup. And when I left that day, that was the last time I saw her. Yeah, Dr. Thomas. Last time I saw Dr. Thomas was in November of 2004, and I had scheduled a new appointment to go back in like October of 2005. At that point, I destroyed my ankle. And when I went back, I discovered that Dr. Thomas was gone, and I had to make an appointment with Dr. Harry, and he was there. Dr. Harry was there when I went back in 2005 because Dr. Thomas had left and had gone to the University of Maryland. So what happens when you talk things out. You remember how it all played out. Yep, Dr. Thomas was gone in November, and then Dr. Harry was the doctor I saw in 2005. But ultimately, the end of 2003 was Dr. Thomas essentially, like I said, stepping down my medication. And then a year later, I had my last appointment with her, and I moved on to Dr. Harry, who then I only saw that one time. And I have to admit, I just maintained my relationship with my regular doctor, Dr. Booth, and he monitored me, and I had no issues. Ultimately, it was under control. Sarcoidosis was under control. Now, there'll be times where if you were to see me out in public or at home and I'm sitting still too long, I have a nervous sort of twitch. I'll move my foot. People have seen me and think I look like I'm crazy because I'm sitting there for too long, and then all of a sudden I start moving my foot or wiggling my hand because the fatigue was so bad when I was affected or afflicted by the sarcoidosis, where I wouldn't even have the energy to do those little twitchy things. So I knew and know that if I sit for too long, I'm going to start doing that because my mind immediately says, is it coming back? If I can do those quick twitch things, like I said, wiggle my fingers, stomp my foot, shake my knee, do something, I know that it has not returned because I wasn't able to do those things. For sure, that's a nice little kick that helps me mentally get over the fact that, well, the sarcoidosis is still being sort of held under control. It's interesting. I almost forgot about that fact. I'm so glad that I remembered about that. Hand movements and stuff like that that I do even to this day, 22 years later, in order to sort of remind myself that, well, it's not killing me. Next thing you know, I was talking about stuff that happened in 2004 because of those appointments, and then Dr. Harry in 2005 after Dr. Thomas had moved on. I got to admit, Dr. Harry, he was not the guy that I felt overly comfortable with. Primarily because I had such a good relationship with Dr. Thomas. She was such, um, I guess you could say she had a better bedside manner than Dr. Harry did. It was kind of crazy that that Dr. Harry was the guy who was just sort of, am I saying it was going through the motions? Good doctor, very good doctor, but it just wasn't quite the same. People are different. I'm very thankful that Dr. Harry picked me up after Dr. Thomas had me. Don't get me wrong, because if I hadn't been able to get a hold of Dr. Harry after Dr. Thomas had gone, it would have been maybe even, might not have even been in 2005 where I had an appointment because they had to reschedule and reshuffle all kinds of things in order to get me to see him as opposed to her when she was gone. So, thank you, Dr. Harry. And like I said, definitely miss Dr. Thomas. She helped me get through that. But speaking of getting through things, I can honestly say that without any further thought behind it, I have finished my story of 2002 and 2003. This is really the end of that. And my next show that you will hear at the end of June, the June 28th episode, is going to be, as they say, business as usual. I think that's how we're going to roll. Business as usual. We'll do something else. Probably not going to do a story episode. Probably just talking, something to break the ice, make things a little bit more wide open. But as far as this episode goes, I'm going to ring the bell and we're going to go. Main event is over. Main event is over. It's time for the Spear of the Week. Well, here it comes, the Spear of the Week. I am always the person who finds repetitive motion to be slightly irritating. Now, granted, if you do something on a regular and consistent basis for a while, let's say a school year, let's say more than a school year, let's say a couple school years, because your kid goes to the same school, you would think that after like a year of going to school, you would understand the policy of how you drop the kids off. But apparently, a parent didn't quite understand it. And so, I don't even know how I can describe it. It's like you have a kid that was going on a field trip, and you are supposed to be there, but you wait until you have 15 minutes to drop the kid off. Now, there's multiple ways that you could drive around to the area where your kid has to get dropped off, but you choose to go through the line where everybody else's kids are going to be dropped off for regular school, not a field trip. Your kid's going on a field trip, but you chose to be late to get there, and you expect everybody to move out of your way because you were late. And then make matters better, after one person who should have known better but didn't now makes me go all the way through the line, drive all the way back around, and come back to the top again. Another brilliant parent does the same thing. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Now, I understand it's a charter school, and I understand that your kid could have not been in the school for a whole year. It's possible, because if an opening shows up and your kid's on the list, your kid can just start going midway through the year. So let's say you were there maybe 4 months. 4 months is still long enough to figure out how the line works. So you should know better by now. Why? Why are you disrupting my life? All I want to do is drop my kids off and go home and wait to pick them up. But you choose to interfere with everything that's going on and completely mess up the reality and flow of my situation. So the two parents who were trying to drop eighth graders off for a trip, you're the spirit of the week. Now, let's see the book of questions today. What do we got here? What do we got here? What's that? Oh, I'm not going to answer that one right now. That's for another day. Hmm. I'll answer this one because I kind of answered this question before on a whole show, and I think this is a good question. I think it's fun. It's really fun. It's a really fun question to ask. Now, the question is, what's one thing you wish you knew about your grandparents? Here it is. The one thing that I wish I knew about my grandparents was particularly uh, my mother's father and my mother's mother. This is a very interesting question that I would want to ask either one of them because it's really interesting. Because I think to myself about my grandmother. She was born in 1925, and she would have been a teenager during World War II. I would be very curious what it was like as a kid of color, seeing the things that were going on in the news, hearing about the stuff that was going on in the world about World War II. I think that would have been something that I would have wanted to ask my grandmother. Now, on that same note, because I think about it all the time, actually, that's a question that I definitely would have wanted to ask her. Now, I was very young. I was in first grade when my grandfather died. Now, he is even more interesting because He was born in 1899. Now, let's do some quick math. 1899, right? Then you go from 1899 and you go up 15 years. That's 1914. I mean, 1914. World War One. He was 15 in 1914. So in 1915, he'd have been like 16. And there's more than one story about a teenager around 16 or 17 years old who went to go fight in World War One or World War Two. He would have been about that age where he would have could have snuck in and tried to fight in World War One. But what makes it more interesting is, at that same note, he was still alive and a teenager during that time period. I would very much want to know what his experience would have been like talking about World War One. So those are questions that I would have liked to have known. I think it's one thing I would have wished to know about my grandparents. My grandfather on my mother's side, I would want to know what he knew of World War One. And the same would be said about my grandmother, who would have been about his age during World War Two. I'd be curious to know what their thoughts were about that. That's always in my head. I really, really question that all the time. I'd like to know what their view of World War One and World War Two were. But now it's time to wrap up this episode. You can always find me on Instagram, Philip Henderson 5102. Um, I'm all over the other places. Check me out on TikTok. I'm actually on there somewhere. I'm on X. But my favorite thing is the Lip Facebook group. Join us. There is always room for one more. Also, I need you to subscribe and like this YouTube channel at Phil the Lip. That's a big deal. I definitely want you to do that so you can continue to listen to the show and show us your full support. Now, like I said earlier, this was definitely a rough day. A lot of things were a little bit crazy today. And so, what I would want to use as words of wisdom today come from one of my favorite movies, Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. The scene where the young Indiana Jones was given his hat by this veteran archaeologist at the time when he took the Cross of Coronado from Indiana Jones. And what he did was he looked at Indiana Jones and said, "Hey, you lost today, kid. Doesn't mean you have to like it." That's kind of where I'm sitting at the moment. And those are my words of wisdom. You lost today, kid, but it doesn't mean you have to like it. Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. On that note, my name is Phil, and you just listened to The Lip.